The 5 words in Mark 11 that make the fig tree curse finally make sense. It is just before sunrise on a dusty road outside Jerusalem, and a man is hungry. He has spent the night in a small village called Bethany, on the far side of a hill, the kind of place that never makes the maps. Now he is walking the 2 miles back into the city with 12 tired men behind him. The sky is going from gray to gold. The air still has the cool of night in it, and his stomach is empty. Then he sees it. Off the side of the road, alone, a single fig tree. And this tree is not bare. It is covered in leaves green, full alive, the only splash of real color in a brown and dusty landscape. From where he stands, it looks like a promise. A tree dressed like that, in full leaf, is a tree that says, "Come closer, I have something for you." So he does. He walks off the road, up to the tree, and he reaches into the branches looking for breakfast. There is nothing there, not one fig, just leaves. And what he does next is the strangest thing you will ever watch Jesus do. He looks at the tree, and he speaks to it. Not a prayer, a sentence aimed straight at the wood and the bark. He says that no one will ever eat fruit from it again, and the men behind him hear every word. Now stop, and feel how odd this is. You know the things this man does. He takes 5 loaves and feeds a crowd of thousands until there are baskets of leftovers. He touches blind eyes, and the whole world floods in. He says a dead girl is only sleeping, and she gets up and asks for something to eat. Every miracle you can name is a miracle of giving, of mercy, of more. And here, on this one morning, he walks up to a tree, and he kills it, over breakfast. Because he was hungry, and it had no fruit. Read quickly. It looks like a bad mood. It looks, if you are honest, almost petty. People have stumbled over this passage for 2,000 years for exactly that reason. It does not fit. It is the one scene that seems beneath him. But here's what most people miss. The man who wrote this down, a young writer named Mark, setting down the memories of the Apostle Peter, he slips in one small line, 5 words. They sit in the middle of the sentence like a footnote, the kind of thing your eye slides right past on the way to the next verse. 5 quiet words that scholars have argued over in seminary halls for centuries, because on the surface, they seem to make the whole thing worse, not better. Those 5 words are the key to everything. We are going to come back to them, but not yet. Because this is not a story about a tree. This is not a story about a hungry man. This is not a story about a bad morning on the road to Jerusalem. This is a story about something Jesus wanted a whole watching nation to see, something he still wants you to see, about the difference between looking alive and being alive, about leaves and fruit. Stay with me, because once you see the detail Mark left sitting in the text, you will never read this the same way again. To understand what just happened on that road, you have to understand the tree, not as a symbol yet, as a plant. Because the answer is hiding in something every farmer in ancient Judea knew by heart, and almost no reader today ever stops to learn. Here is how a fig tree works. The fig is a strange fruit. It does not flower first and fruit later, the way an apple does. On a fig tree, the early fruit and the leaves come out together. Before the main crop of the season ever arrives, the branches push out small green knots of fruit. The Hebrew word for them is pagim. Little hard buds you can actually pick and eat. They come out at the same time as the leaves, sometimes even a little before them. They are the tree's first promise. They are the proof that the real harvest is on the way. So follow what that means. A fig tree standing there in full leaf is making an announcement. Those leaves are a sign hung out for the whole road to read, and the sign says, "There is fruit here, come and eat." A tree in leaf with none of those early buds on it is not a tree that is simply early or simply late. It is a tree that is lying. It has put on the entire costume of fruitfulness, every leaf in place, every promise made with nothing underneath to back it up. That is what Jesus walked up to. Not an innocent tree caught at an awkward time of year. A tree wearing the full uniform of a harvest it did not have. All of the advertising, none of the goods. And now hold that picture in your mind. Because Jesus did not invent it. He was standing inside a tradition his people had carried for 600 years. Long before that morning, God's own prophets had reached for this exact image again and again, and they almost always reached for it to talk about one thing, his people. Listen to the prophet Hosea. When God remembers Israel at her best, when he remembers the joy of first finding her, he says it was like finding the first ripe figs on the fig tree in its first season. That was the picture of the nation as God meant her to be: sweet, early, real. Now hear what happens to that picture. Centuries later, the prophet Jeremiah, the one they called the weeping prophet, stands over the same nation and speaks for God, and the words come out heavy with grief. "There will be no figs on the tree," he says. "The leaves will wither. The very things I gave them will pass away." And the prophet Micah cries out in the first person, in a voice that sounds almost like hunger itself. "Woe is me," he says. "There is no cluster to eat. There is no early fig that my soul craves. I came looking, and there was nothing here." Do you hear it? That is not a man complaining about produce. That is the ache of God himself, walking up to his own people, full of leaves, full of religious activity, covered in the green of festivals and sacrifices and singing crowds, and reaching in and finding nothing to eat. For 600 years, the fig tree had meant Israel. Every prophet knew it. Every scribe knew it. The men walking behind Jesus that morning, men raised from childhood on these scriptures, would have felt the ground shift the moment he stepped off the road and walked toward that tree. Which tells you something important. He was not improvising. He was not simply hungry and short-tempered. This was not a snack that went wrong. This was a prophet doing what the prophets had always done, taking a real thing in the real world and turning it into a sign you could not unsee. And he was doing it on the most loaded road in the world, the road that climbs straight up into Jerusalem, straight toward the temple, straight toward the men who ran it. He had a destination that morning, and he had a point to make when he arrived. The tree was only the first half of the sentence. The rest of it was waiting for him at the top of the hill. So before we follow him up that hill, let me make sure you are holding the one thing this whole story turns on. The tree was never about the tree. It was a sign. A living, leafing, public sign, and the men who watched it knew exactly what fig trees had always stood for. Jesus was about to say something out loud, in wood and silence, that the prophets had been saying for 6 centuries. Keep that in your mind, because what he does next, at the top of the hill, only makes sense if you are still holding the tree in your hands. And if this is opening the passage up for you, if you have read this story before and it never quite sat right, and it is finally starting to make sense, do me a quick favor. Subscribe, so the next one of these finds you. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and whether you had ever heard the part about the early fruit before today. I read those. Now, up the hill. Because the strangest thing about this whole account is not the tree at all. It is the way Mark chose to tell it. Here is the part nobody tells you, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Mark does something with this story that he does on purpose, and that he does only a handful of times in his entire gospel. He takes the fig tree, and he cuts it in half. He gives you the first half. Jesus speaks to the tree, the men hear it, and then he just stops. He does not tell you what happened to the tree. He leaves it hanging there, unfinished, and into that gap, into the open space of the unfinished story, he drops something else entirely. He takes you into the temple. Watch the order carefully. Jesus curses the tree. Then Jesus walks into the temple courts, and all the calm is gone. He starts turning over tables. The money changers' coins go scattering and ringing across the stone floor. He drives out the men buying and selling. He will not even let people carry their merchandise through the courts. And he says, quoting the prophets yet again, that this house was meant to be a house of prayer for all the nations, and they have turned it into a den of robbers. And only after all of that, the next morning, does Mark finally circle back and finish the story of the fig tree. This is not sloppy storytelling. Mark was a careful writer. He did this on purpose, and scholars even have a name for it. They call it a Markan sandwich. One story slid deliberately inside another, so that the two stories explain each other. Mark is doing far more than reporting the order things happened in. He is telling you how to read them. He is saying, with the very shape of his sentences, do not look at the tree without looking at the temple. They are the same thing. Let that land. The tree is the temple. The temple is the tree. And now think about what that temple actually looked like. We are not guessing here. The Jewish historian Josephus, who saw the thing with his own eyes before the Romans tore it to the ground, described it as one of the most magnificent buildings in the entire world. White stone so bright that when the sun struck it, people had to turn their eyes away. Gold across the front, so dazzling that travelers could see it flashing from miles off the way. You can see one impossibly green tree from far down a dusty road, crowds pouring through the gates, priests moving in their robes, smoke rising off the altars, money changing hands, songs, sacrifices, festivals stacked one on top of the next. From a distance, it looked gloriously, overwhelmingly alive. It looked exactly like a fig tree in full leaf. And Jesus walked into all of that noise and color and motion. And he reached in past the gold and the crowds and the singing, looking for the one thing the whole building existed to produce: real worship, real justice, real hearts turned toward God. And he came up with a fistful of leaves. Stay with me, because this is the hinge of the whole thing. The problem with the temple was never that it was empty. Empty would have been honest. The problem was that it was full. Full of activity, full of religion, full of impressive, expensive, busy, sincere-looking motion. It had every single leaf in place. It made every promise a holy place could possibly make. And underneath the leaves, down in the place where the fruit was supposed to be, Jesus found tables of men turning a quiet profit on people who only wanted to get close to God. That is why the tables went over. Not because Jesus lost his temper. For the very same reason the tree was cursed. Both of them were advertising a harvest that was not there. And now you start to understand the order of it all. He did not stumble onto a barren tree, and then, in some separate and unrelated mood, get angry at a corrupt temple. He acted out the lesson on the tree first, on the way in, so that when you watched what he did inside the temple, you would already have the picture sitting in your hands. The tree was the sermon. The temple was the congregation. And the sentence he spoke over the wood that morning, he was about to speak over a whole way of being religious. There was just one piece left. The tree was still standing. He had spoken, but nothing had visibly happened to it yet. The men had heard the words, but the leaves were still green. That changed by morning. The next day, they walked the same road back toward the city. Same dust, same hill, and it is Peter who notices. That matters, because this whole account comes down to us through Peter's own memory. Peter looks over at the tree, and he stops cold. It is dead, not wilting, not dropping a few leaves, dead. And Mark gives you one Greek word for what happened to it: exeranthe, withered, dried up. And then he tells you the thing that should send a chill down your spine. It had withered from the roots, not from the top down, the way a plant dies when you forget to water it. From the roots up, all the way through, down in the hidden place where the life actually comes from, there was nothing left at all. The death was not cosmetic, it was total. Peter just points at it and says it out loud. Teacher, look. The tree you cursed has withered. And now finally, we go back and pick up those 5 words, the ones I told you to hold on to at the very beginning. The footnote Mark slipped into the text that scholars have argued over for centuries. Because right there, back when Jesus first walked up to the tree, Mark adds this strange little aside. He tells you Jesus found nothing but leaves, and then, almost in a whisper, he writes, "For it was not the season for figs." And every honest reader trips right over that line. Wait, hold on. It was not even the season for figs? Then this is monstrously unfair. You cannot condemn a tree for having no fruit when the fruit was not even due yet. That is like flying into a rage at an apple tree in the dead of January. For centuries, people have read that one line and felt the whole story curdle in their hands. It seems to take Jesus from merely puzzling all the way to plainly unjust. But you already have everything you need to see it. Remember the early fruit. Remember the pagum. Here is the whole point. It was not the season for the main crop of figs, true, but a tree in full leaf should still have had those early buds on it. The leaves were the promise of the buds. So the problem was never that this tree had failed to produce on schedule. The problem was that it was the only tree on the entire road dressed up for a harvest, waving its leaves at everyone who passed, claiming a fruitfulness that the other trees were honest enough not to claim. The other trees along that road were bare, and bare was true. This one was lying. That is the detail that changes everything. Jesus did not curse the tree for having no fruit. He cursed it for having leaves with no fruit. For the gap between the advertisement and the reality, the sin was never the emptiness. The sin was the display hung over the emptiness. This is not a story about figs. This is not a story about a temple in Jerusalem. This is not a story about people who happened to live 2,000 years ago. This is a story about the terrifying possibility of looking completely alive while being dead at the roots. And here is where it reaches up off the page and finds you. You have stood near a tree like this, a person who had every leaf in place, the right words, the right schedule, the calm and capable surface, the life that photographs beautifully, and somewhere back behind all of it, a quiet, withering emptiness that only the people closest to them ever catch a glimpse of. You know how the leaves can stay green for a long time after the roots have gone dry. A tree can look full long after it has stopped being alive. And if you are honest, in some season, that tree has been you. The Sunday face, the fine I'm fine. The full and impressive calendar of good and holy-looking activity, laid out like leaves over a place inside you that has not actually tasted God in longer than you would ever admit out loud. That is the thing this story walks up to. Not your emptiness, your covering. The leaves you hang out so that nobody reaches in and finds the branches bare, because that is the part that should stop you cold. Jesus did not curse the tree from a safe distance. He walked all the way up to it. He came close. He reached in. He was looking. And the only reason he was looking was that he was hungry. He wanted to find something there. And he still does. He still walks up to the leafing, busy, impressive life. And he reaches past all of it for one real fig, one true thing. And so the most honest question this passage will ever ask you is not whether you have leaves. Everyone has leaves. The question is whether, if he reached in this morning, his hand would close around anything real. So what do you carry out of all this? Back onto your own road. 3 things. The first is simply true, and you can hold it for the rest of your life. The fig tree was never really a tree. It was a sermon Jesus preached without a single word of explanation. In the oldest language, his people had the language of the prophets, where a barren fig tree had always meant a people full of religion and empty of God. He acted it out on the road to the temple, so that you would understand the temple. Leaves without fruit. That is what he came looking for, and that is what he found. The second one is for you, and it is sharper. God is not impressed by leaves. He never has been. All the activity you could ever stack up the attendance, the volume, the busy and beautiful surface of a religious life, none of it is the fruit. It is only ever the leaves. And a tree can wear a full set of leaves right up until the morning it is found dead at the roots. Activity is not life. Looking alive is not the same thing as being alive. And the third one is the one I want to leave sitting in your chest, because it is not really a warning at all. It is mercy, in a shape that almost looks like a threat. He came to the tree hungry. Sit with that for a second. The God of the whole universe walked up to that branch wanting to find something there, not to inspect it, not to grade it, to be fed by it. He came close because he was looking for something real. And he comes to you the very same way, this morning, not from across the sky, but right up to the branches of your actual life, reaching past every leaf, hoping. He would so much rather find one small, real, honest fig than the most magnificent display of leaves you could ever hang. So here is what I want to know, and I read these. When you picture that hand reaching into your branches this morning, what would it find? And which is harder for you to hand him, the leaves or the truth that is underneath them? Tell me below. And the next time you are out on a road early in the morning, tired, and you pass a tree that is somehow greener and fuller than every other tree around it, let it ask you the question, not whether you look alive, whether you are. Because the same Jesus who walked off the road that morning hungry is still walking up to fig trees, and he is still hoping to find figs.